This is the Dane Moore NBA podcast coming at you Wednesday afternoon. It's September 4th, and we are exactly 1 month away from the Wolves' first preseason game. That's crazy. So it's time to, I think, slowly start getting back into doing pods again here. We'll start with these first few weeks of September doing one episode per week and then kind of maybe ramping up a little bit as there's more stuff to talk about later in the month. And then basically come October 1st, we are back doing 4 or 5 episodes a week. Once training camp gets going, they start playing preseason games. But that's a month away. I thought for today, for us, for me, for everybody, the place to start kind of getting back into Wolves mode is by reminding ourselves what happened this summer. We took August completely off from the show, so some things happened. The Olympics happened then. We'll start by kind of talking about August and moving back through the summer. Again, the Olympics, everything Ant and Rudy did. There was Summer League in July. The beginning of July, we had a little bit of roster change just with the offseason and free agency. I think it's worth reminding ourselves of what happened on draft night. And then, through all that, I'm sure there's other little random tidbits that Kyle will remind me of that I didn't put into the show notes today. Kyle, let's do this. Somehow we're less than a month away from training camp. Are you ready for another season? Did you spend more time looking at this outline today or your fantasy football team?
I spent more time buying this plant behind me because if you're on YouTube, just a quick plug. Because we kind of not rebranded, but refreshed the page, and shout out to Cam and Cooper. They're going to be working with us again this year. I've kind of been deeming this a new season, even though technically we got another month before things pick up. But for the show, like you said, we took August off. YouTube's been enhanced. I think we're going to be doing a lot of stuff on YouTube. But if you're a traditional podcast listener on Apple or Spotify, we'll continue to pump it out there as well. But you've got... I was really impressed with your background. You got the shoes out, the collection, some plants.
Molly moved those over there today.
Yeah, shout out to our roommates because they really keep this thing going. But in terms of this pod, the way I kind of pitched it to you was when like a new season of your show starts, those first 30 seconds, it's like, previously on the Dane Moore NBA podcast, like what did we miss since we did that weird pod after they got blown out or eliminated by the Mavs and I was in New Orleans and you were somewhere. So we thought after that it was going to be a fairly chill summer, right? Not a lot of transactions in terms of free agency. And at the time, some late first round pick. And it actually was a pretty noticeable seismic shift of a summer with what they did both in the draft and free agency, and then with all the Olympic stuff too. I think that stuff actually relates exactly to what you're going to see on the court come October. So wherever you want to start, I think you probably want to just start with the most recent and go backwards.
Yeah, let me just say right off the top that this episode is brought to you, brought to everyone by Falling Knife Brewing Company. And we would just love for those of you in Minneapolis to check out Falling Knife sometime this September. I know I tend to go there more in the fall. I don't know. Great place to have a fall beer any day of the week. But they also they're showing Minnesota Lynx games in the tap room like they do Wolves games during the season. So the Lynx do play Caitlin Clark and the Fever on Friday night at 6:30. So I would say go check that out in the tap room. And we'll have plenty more coming up at Falling Knife as the season comes around. But Kyle, you were at Falling Knife a couple weeks ago.
I was at Falling Knife.
You took up for $1,000 in pull tabs.
Shout out to Dan and the crew for getting those pull tabs installed. My wife may or may not have pulled a couple 500s, but it was a good reminder too of just all the stuff they've got going on there with the pizza and the outdoor patio, and just they're a really good spot. Obviously, the beer is really good, but also just a really great spot to host all these different events. And the Wolves fan base has grown, right, via Falling Knife, but also too, like for Lynx games now, Lynx Fever, that's going to be an amazing game. So if you're looking for a place to go find fellow Lynx fans and just talk hoops, watch hoops, there's probably no better spot in the city than Falling Knife. So head over there on Friday.
Perfect. Falling Knife Brewing Company, Northeast Minneapolis. All right, Kyle, let's get into this. Again, we're moving backwards through the summer. That last game against Dallas is, I guess, kind of our end point of this episode. May 30th. So the most recent thing I have is Team USA wins gold, and how I think that's relative to us is not only that Ant was on that team, but he was sort of a main character, right? And I don't know. I think that stuff matters. I noticed that Charles Barkley was on with Bill Simmons today. I listened to like the first 15 minutes of that, and they were, referencing some of it. And I don't know, 1992 and the Dream Team and all that. I was 2 years old, so I don't specifically remember what was all going on there. But I've always kind of drawn this sort of Ant and Charles Barkley comparison. I remember even just like back when Ant did that first interview with Marnie Gellner, and it was like trash can ball, whatever.
Yeah.
You just started seeing this like charisma, funny, doesn't really care. Like there's always been something about Ant and Chuck that I've found similar, even though obviously very different types of basketball players. And I think this is at least in this way, there's a similarity of, I think that was kind of, as I understand it, Chuck's sort of like real introduction to the world. He was already like an all NBA player, all-star when that time came around for the Dream Team, but it put him on a different sort of stage. I think this put Ant on a different stage. Chuck, I looked up, he actually won MVP after the Dream Team Olympics. He was 29, Ant's 23, so maybe a little different there. But I just thought that the Ant experience with Team USA in the Olympics was important. Not so much from the way we always make it important of like, oh, everybody's like recruiting players to be on their team. Like I think we know Kevin Durant and Anthony Edwards are not going to be on the same team anytime soon. But nonetheless, I think that was big. I think that was big for Ant, and it's another sort of step in his like propulsion towards, being a superstar, famous person in the world.
Yeah, the Olympics were great for a multitude of reasons, right? That's in general, 10,000 feet. There's really no good sports to watch in July. So you get that treat of like, I was watching all the different sports. Even the Paralympics right now are really fun to watch. But it also, the Olympics kind of showed us who was a real patriot, because there were some fans cheering against Team USA because their favorite player played for another country. But that's another topic for another day. I think the Ant thing was cool, not because of
what that means.
People listen to this know. The Ant thing was cool to me, and not to segue because this is about your original point, but it's just another one of those chapters in the book, and that sounds cliche, especially as our friend Chris Hine is literally writing the Anthony Edwards book.
Yeah,
but
Chris.
It's just, one thing after another. He comes into the league and it's COVID, and it seems like that was 2 weeks ago, even though now it was over 4. I mean, we're kind of coming up on the 4-year anniversary of him getting drafted, because the COVID draft was like in November. And again, it could feel like 40 years. It could feel like 4 days, but just everything that's come both on the court with him revitalizing a franchise that was maybe the worst franchise in sports, to the point where they just come off a Western Conference Finals trip. But then he does a movie, and he gets a shoe, and he gets a gold medal, right? And I know the Olympics are exhibition, kind of at its core, but it was also the most important basketball Ant's probably ever played in his life, depending on whether you think the Western Conference Finals are this. So for him to have a role in it,
right,
or to be even adaptable enough, or to just have a skill set or one skill that was so better than everyone else. I mean, Halliburton didn't really get run with that squad. You saw Tatum not really get run. Those guys are also all NBA, top 15, 20 players in the league. But Ant just had something that he could contribute to a roster full of all of the best players you and I watched growing up, right? I mean, they win the gold medal by just running kind of a 3-man weave between LeBron, KD, and Steph. And for Ant to even have a good enough resume to be out there in those situations was really, really cool. And back to the book cliche, it adds to his long resume of what he's already done at 23. He just, he had a birthday last month, and it also propels him. And I don't think they do the super team talks as much, even though him and KD became best of friends, but it does kind of propel him of like, okay, to your Charles Barkley analogy, these guys not only come back and are all friends, but they come back and they're just playing really elite basketball, because rather than just being in a gym all summer 1-on-0, they were playing basketball, getting reps against the best competition in the world, not just the country. So it sets him up, Dane, in my mind, year 5, the contract extension kicks in now. Expectations, despite already being pretty lofty for the kid, are going to be even higher. And I think he's well suited to, it's going to be November, early December. And if the Wolves are winning games, he's going to be in the MVP talks, because I think voters, and again, we're getting so far ahead, but I think voters start to lose steam on the Embiids and the Jokic's of the world. They're going to find other guys to talk about. And if Ant backs up his words, which I know have been kind of controversy in the last couple of weeks, with his play, there's no reason that the team's not topping the West and he's not topping on these awards. And I think the Team USA thing is just a springboard for him to take another leap, which is pretty crazy because he's already taken so many.
No, absolutely. I had down the notable was that he was a staple of the rotation too. Like you mentioned, Tatum and Halliburton weren't, and I think he was absolutely deserving of that. But I think part of why he had that with a bullet was that he played for Kerr last summer, in the World Cup, and sort of established himself on that version of Team USA. But what I really think about is in that context of him playing these last 2 summers for Team USA, and that's work, man. Like work after a full season of the NBA, which is a load of work, in and of itself. And for the kid who rightfully had questions about his work ethic, shape. I mean, I saw that stuff the first couple of years in the league. I saw that, firsthand. And he's done all of the things in these last 2 summers to commit to the game, commit to his body, and commit to being a worker. And that, I know he's got a team around him and there's a lot on the line. And, we could be like, yeah, I would do that same thing if I was in that position. But the reality of the situation is a lot of people don't, right? And a lot of people, take the time off, take the opportunities elsewhere. And Anthony Edwards hasn't done that. And so I don't know. Sometimes I feel like we're like, Ant's been playing for 2 straight summers, like injury, or he's going to be tired or whatever. I'm like, I don't know. I think the kid is establishing a work ethic, and that is, I don't know, that to me, that outweighs whatever any sort of injury risk that'll happen. And, he's chilling right now. He's getting in the gym and working out and stuff, but it's not like he's not getting his vacation and some time here to recharge before the season too. But yeah, that's why I had on him.
It reminds me, it might have been that summer where they traded for Rudy Gobert, and that was like, remember we were in Vegas and Ant was bigger, but not fully bigger in the sense that you always want him to be bigger. And he made a joke that I took 2 weeks off and I got fat. I think that was an Ant quote. And who among us, right? But it just, I actually don't think, he is so young, and these guys are going to be playing basketball in the summer no matter what, right? There's the runs in LA or just 1-on-0s, and just, you can see players get hurt, right? And just training. Sure. That happened to
Gigi Jackson.
Yeah, so that stuff happens, but it's almost better that Ant's in a controlled environment with a bunch of trainers and a bunch of people that, have specific routines and outlines for what he wants to do. But I just think it always reminds me of when you're busy and you're just, I just can't wait till that Saturday. I've said this before to you, but I just want to get to Saturday when I can chill, and then 2 hours into Saturday, I'm bored. What am I going to do? So I think for Ant, the more basketball he plays, the better. He still has, the Olympics wrapped up, early August or whatever. So he'll have some time to just take photos with Justin Jefferson and kind of recharge. But what he learned, not only from the coach, he was also playing for the best coaches in the league, right? He was playing around Spo, and he was playing around Steve Kerr and Ty Lue. So all the knowledge he gained from them, all the knowledge he gained from just being on a bus with Kevin Durant and being on a bus with LeBron and Steph. Also, it was really cool to see those guys kind of embrace him and love having him around. That's any Timberwolves player in the last 4 years would say the same thing. It's we love just being around the kid and his energy. So he's just kind of, another chapter rounding into form. But all that aside, how does it affect the 24-25 Timberwolves? And I think it just puts him, I think there's a reason, right, that the Minnesota Timberwolves have increased their national TV games for this next year more than anyone. It's because of number 5. So is he going to be able to manage the expectations? This team has never had greater expectations in the 8 years we've covered it. So he'll be the litmus test of can he grow, can he take another leap, and can he handle all of the stuff that's going to come to this team, because there are still doubters, because they're a small market team. There are still haters because they employ Rudy Gobert and Karl-Anthony Towns, and he's going to be the kind of face of it all to answer those questions and hopefully bury him. Yeah.
Speaking of, let's move over to Rudy. That also France made it to the gold medal game. I mean,
which was crazy, right?
Like, yeah, like that's what I obviously put down in my notes. Like, this caused another round of elevated Rudy Gobert bashing, shades of the Terrence Mann thing. Like that did happen in August, and in a lot of it, or in ways, some of that was warranted. He didn't play at times, but I do think the collective we are sleeping on how big of an accomplishment it was for France to go to the gold medal game while in Paris. And obviously, I've been watching that France team a lot since they traded for Gobert, right? Watched all the Eurobasket stuff, that first 2022, that first summer after they traded for Gobert. And because I was like, I want to watch this guy, like with a focus. And there was those games were happening in July or whatever. And then World Cup last year, watched Gobert play a lot. So I was kind of like familiar with that team. And they were not on this level. And, what changed in many ways is Victor Wembanyama, right? Like being added to the team and playing for them this summer after not playing the last 2 summers. That changed how good this team would be. But like Rudy Gobert as an individual, as a player, as like a representative of France has really been trying to build that team up to be in the gold medal game, or to compete for a medal, in the Olympics in Paris. And his team achieved that. And he played a role in it. And it's unfortunate because I don't hate Rudy Gobert like the majority of people on the internet. I try to think I see his shortcomings, but also not let those blind me from the good stuff about him. I think it's just super unfortunate that that accomplishment did get overshadowed by the fact that he wasn't playing hardly at all in the end of the Olympics and the kind of the tournament at the end, the medal games. It's the confusion that is Rudy Gobert. That team, they had to make a choice. They thought it was the right choice to make a shift to playing one big, right? To playing one big against these teams like that Canada game, right? Canada's basically playing like 4 guards. So they didn't want to play 2 centers against a team that's playing 4 NBA guards. And once we take away the names and take away the history and stuff like that, that makes sense as a basketball move. It also worked. And it worked for France. It was a good basketball move. And they chose Victor Wembanyama over Rudy Gobert to be their one big. That just makes sense. It just sucks that it's another thing. And I think I'm sure Rudy feels that, and that sucks. But I don't know. I try to focus on the accomplishment of it, but also recognize that he does need to be held accountable to some extent for not being able to earn that playing time from his coach. And part of that is because he just wasn't much of an offensive threat for that team. That was the piece. I get that they didn't start him, right? And they wanted to go one big, basketball wise, that makes sense. But then they were playing that Matthias Lesort guy, who's a really good overseas center. They're paying him as the backup center, and that's because he could kind of get buckets around the basket. He's kind of energy post up big, who could efficiently score. And the truth of the matter is, Rudy still can't do that. So he got pushed down and out of the rotation. In times with it, it's just I don't know. It was crazy. Now, that was 2-3 weeks ago now, but even just thinking back, and it's man, that was nuts. What do you got on that?
The discourse around him is never going to improve, right? Like even like with the Derek Lively comments lately, which are pretty wild because it's like, man, your goal should be to be Rudy Gobert. And also too, and I know the hypocrisy in saying this as someone who is on 2 podcasts, but we just have way too many podcasts. Like we just like once Theo Pinson gets his own podcast and he averages 1.7 more points per game than I've averaged, we probably need to have an audit. But yeah, with Rudy, I mean, the way I dumbed it down, kind of to my parents were out this weekend, is they just needed more offense, right? Like even the dancing bear himself, Yabusele, like they just needed more guys for France that could score. And their guards, I mean, Batum in that setting is kind of peak Batum, but he's still not really a scorer. And Fournier had his moments, but their guards, I thought, kind of let them down. So they needed more offense, which again, they kind of went away from Rudy for Team France. Whereas like when Rudy comes back to the States and plays with the Wolves, they got plenty of offense. They might have too much offense at times. Like they just need guys that can really defend and rebound. And it kind of stems all the way back to that Memphis series of what were our biggest deficiencies. So I don't know. I mean, there's a ton of analogies you can make, but it's just, I think
a little bit of it was defense though too.
Yeah, no, it wasn't all
being able to guard the perimeter and in ways that's actually like Gobert could have played the 5 defensively against Canada, right? In that game, like you have him guard Dwight Powell, of course, that's fine. It was that they couldn't play him and then have Wembanyama be guarding on the perimeter. You know, you didn't want Wembanyama and RJ Barrett, right? They did as Wembanyama is a great defender too, but like you don't probably want him to be playing in space and isolation as like a wing perimeter defender there too. So they're like, okay, well, Wembanyama, we don't want him guarding on the perimeter. We're going to put him, you know, at center instead. And, you know, whatever, like part of it was defensively for Rudy too. Cause could he have gone and guarded RJ Barrett or whatever? But yeah, it's the weird intricacies that are Rudy Gobert that he, you know, fits really well in certain situations, and in others, you can make a case that Matthias Lesort is a better option than him, and that's just the reality of the situation.
And you know, when you think about Rudy Gobert, it's still that COVID moment too, right? With the mics, I just think that he's just a player, whether it be because he's international or little idiosyncrasies in the past. He just is hated, right. And if anyone listening to this knows me well enough, that just makes me like him more. Because there's just, you know, like, not to bring up the Derek Lively thing again, because we're talking about the Olympics, but the focus on Rudy is always what he can't do, or when he gets, I mean, again, we're back to the Terrence Mann thing, like you said, like, oh, he got played off the court because he can't guard the perimeter. It's like, or because he can't guard Luka one-on-one. It's like, who really can in those situations? You know, like, Derek Lively shoots 50% from the free throw line. Let's chill a bit with his Hall of Fame career arc. So if Rudy can come back, I don't know if he'll ever be able to win a 5th Defensive Player of the Year, just, again, narrative. But if he can come back and play Defensive Player of the Year type defense again, I mean, last year will always be remembered, I think, for the large step forward that Ant took, All-NBA, and kind of leading his team. Mm-hmm. But goddamn, man, like, they're not in the Western Conference Finals without Rudy Gobert and everything he did in the regular season, everything he did in that, you know, he played pretty good defense, I thought, in that Denver series. So they just need him to come back, embrace him again, and he's a big part of what they do. And despite what you saw internationally, I still think he has his athleticism. I still think he has all. I mean, even for France, right? Like, he still rebounded really well when asked to be out there. I thought he still protected the rim. So he's still the same Rudy Gobert. Just, I think, as the game evolves, and then, you know, if Luka Garza was Victor Wembanyama, the Wolves probably wouldn't need as much Rudy. So they just had a better option, but not a lot of teams have that option to have maybe the best unicorn of all time or up and coming. So I'm excited for Rudy to come back, because I also think too, he did still represent his country really well. France making the gold medal game was a big surprise to everyone that kind of paid attention, but also maybe he's got a little bit of a chip on his shoulder, more than normal. So I love when guys have that, because it just kind of leads to a bigger performance in the NBA. And he would be the number one guy I'm excited to watch next year of, you know, did you hear everything? I know these guys always say they're not online, but did you hear all that stuff, and how does it translate to the on the court performance?
And I mean, and we've asked Rudy versions of that over the past couple years. And what his answer to it is, I got to win a championship, and then they can't say anything. Like, and I really do think that that's where he's at with it right now, is like, that's going to be my proof. The Defensive Player of the Years aren't proof enough, right? me playing against your team 3-4 times a year and beating you the majority of the time, that's not enough.
Yeah.
And like, so I do think, he's driven, and I think he's probably aware enough to know that like his window to be a main guy on a championship team, like the second or third best player, is now, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so I think that that fuels the fire there some too. I do just want to say the last thing on that, like, because it isn't just Derek Lively, it's Chauncey Billups, it's all these other people. I think it's a really interesting thing in my experience with the Gobert thing is like watch a ton of the NBA, but I watch vast majority of Wolves stuff. I try to, I feel like I watched a decent amount of Rudy Gobert in Utah and had an opinion, a preconceived notion of him coming in here. It really changes watching him every single game.
Mm-hmm.
And I've had the chance to talk to like a handful of executives or coaches who were there with him in Utah or now here in Minnesota, and kind of experiencing that like every day with Rudy versus, occasionally like tapping in and seeing him. And I think, media people, coaches, executives from Utah, media people, coaches, executives from Minnesota, being around him all the time has shifted it. And it's important to remember that even though Chauncey Billups, is a head coach in the NBA, he has not had that with him or every single day, or Derek Lively, playing against him or having him on your team every single day and seeing it over and over again. And it is weird that like a coach is out there in the NBA saying he sucks or isn't deserving of the things that he's deserving of, or another good player who plays his position. In my opinion, that's the distinction right there is you really need to watch it every single day to grow an appreciation for it. At least that was my experience, because I came in honestly probably more on the Derek Lively side of things 2 years ago before Rudy Gobert was on the team. Let's grab our first break here. Last thing on the Olympics: Nickeil Alexander-Walker and Joe Ingles were on Canada and Australia, but neither of them really played that much. But I had that in my notes. Okay, our first break here. Today's show is brought to you by Adriana Lanik at Coldwell Banker Realty. And I know there is a chunk of you out there listening right now that are thinking about buying a home. There's a lot of you listening. There's got to be some of you who are thinking about it, maybe procrastinating the idea a little bit. And the reality of the situation is you need a realtor to help you get the ball rolling, to kind of get things moving in the right direction, get rid of some of that procrastination. And Adriana is a licensed realtor in Minnesota and Wisconsin to help you with that process. If you're thinking about it at all, we'd love if you go to her website, thedancingrealtor.com, which is in the show notes here, and reach out to set up a free strategy session. You can see on the screen when you go to thedancingrealtor.com that this splash page comes up to win free Wolves tickets after booking a strategy session with her. So that's kind of our perk there. But if you're in that spot where you're trying to buy a home, and if you're there, get a realtor, and I would recommend Adriana. Again, dancingrealtor.com, or call her or text her at 715-304-9920 to book a strategy session. And like I said, mention this podcast and you'll be entered to win some free Wolves tickets. Today's show is also brought to you, if you already own a home, by Your Home Improvement Company. We also know there's a chunk of you out there who are trying to maybe get a home improvement project done this fall before it gets cold. And we'd love if you made Your Home Improvement Company your answer to that project. Right now, they're offering buy two, get two free triple pane windows as a deal. For September. They're windows that come with a lifetime warranty and are installed by certified professionals. Your Home Improvement Company also specializes in transforming outdated bathrooms, whether that's just like a simple tub to shower conversion or a whole renovation for your bathroom. Also in September, they're offering 30% off on bathroom remodels. Their bathroom renovations are also done by certified local professionals and are backed by a lifetime warranty. Whatever the project is, windows, bathroom, anything else in the house, with Your Home Improvement Company, they offer great financing deals that require zero money down, zero interest, and zero payments until 2026. I mean, the Wolves could have 2 championships by then. Yeah, something like that. 2 championships by then. Contact your home improvement company by calling 866-777-YHIC or go to yourhomeimprovementco.com. Your home improvement company, where it's your home made better. All right, Kyle. Next time, do you have anything else you want to hit on with the Olympics, or you want to move on to Summer League?
No, let's go to Summer League.
All right, I'd go back to Vegas right now. You want to do that? No.
No. Listen, a little behind the scenes. I spent $5,000 at Best Buy the other day on TVs, Labor Day sale.
You could win it all back.
Yeah, I could, or I could just have less money. So that's why I was giggling. I mean, everyone should get a house, use Adriana, fix your house, use Your Home Improvement, and then hopefully find some TVs and mount them because football starts in 24 hours. But no, let's emotionally go back to Vegas, not physically, because I think that was, Olympics were fun and Ant was a star and Rudy and stuff, but the core of this Timberwolves offseason, coming off the best season in 20 years, was what happened in the draft, but more so what translated into Las Vegas in the Summer League for that week and a half.
Yeah, I mean, I think to speak on your behalf, obviously, we're doing NBA stuff all during the season, so even a couple weeks, a month before the draft, I didn't know that much about Rob Dillingham, right? And you kind of cram before the test of the draft, and you're watching clips, you're reading, you're doing some of that stuff. But I went into Summer League understanding what I understood about Dillingham and Shannon, and done some after the draft research. But for me, it's really important to watch these guys play in person, see them in person, interview them in person. It's all kind of like the first kernels for me of shaping my thoughts or understanding of these players. And I guess if we start with Rob Dillingham with Summer League, if we kind of take his from the end of Summer League to the beginning of Summer League, it kind of works better that way too. He finished Summer League really strong. If you remember that fifth and final Summer League game, he played really well against Orlando Magic, the Orlando Magic Summer League team, while being guarded by Jarrett Culver. So maybe that takes away from it a little bit, but it was he looked like himself. He looked like a player I saw at Kentucky, combining the shot making with the playmaking that was definitely sporadic earlier in the Summer League there. He got his feet under him. Maybe literally he was kind of banged up at the beginning of Summer League, or just a little soreness, stuff that we'd heard about. But that was kind of Rob Dillingham's Summer League, right? From the end, we're like, okay, deep breath, this looks okay. Because after that first game, we're kind of like, all right, that dude looks pretty small. Defense a little concerned about, the shots aren't going in. What is this going to be? Did they overstep with a 19-year-old, needing to be the backup point guard next year? We got to a little bit of a more normal place with Dillingham as Summer League went on.
Jarrett Culver did not make the updated top 100 Timberwolves of all time list. Wow. Might surprise some people, because there are some names on there that shocked me. But anyway, on the Dillingham thing, my biggest takeaway from the summer, or being around him for that week in Vegas and getting to talk to him, I just think he's got the right mentality. I think, and I know that sounds really, really nerdy, but I just think this team could use more dogs. And he clearly, to your point, his best offensive bucket-getting performance, which is what people thought about him in the draft, came in that final game when they had kind of, some guys were sitting. They kind of just probably changed his role for that last one and said, hey, it's the last day of vacation, just go wild. But in those first couple games, the ones that we were at, he definitely was asked to just try to lean into what you said. He's going to be the backup point guard, or the expected backup point guard behind Mike Conley next season. And what can you do as a playmaker? So you might not look as good offensively. You might not, get Summer League notoriety, but we want you to use these real opportunities, these real reps to play make. And I thought for the most part, he did a really good job of that. For the first couple of games, he had 16-2 assist turnover, and then he had that 7-7 game. So that's going to be his role. I mean, they're going to need him on nights to come in and just get buckets, but also with the loss of Jordan McLaughlin, which doesn't sound like a lot, but he just knew the system so well. Yeah. And he was such, a plus-minus darling that with Rob, when he comes into a second unit that has maybe a Naz Reid or a Karl-Anthony Towns or an Anthony Edwards, bucket getting is probably not going to be the first thing they need from him. So can you get the offense going? Can you facilitate? Can you get guys set up? Can you have any sort of, rapport with a Rudy Gobert maybe, which a lot of guys on this team have never really found that love language. So I was impressed by it, but then despite winning those games and stuff, or having good assist turnover, whatever, I really want to score. But remember when he was talking to him, he's like, it's frustrating me, even though I know it's super early in my process. I want to be able to show what I can do, and that's why I was really happy that in that fifth and final game, he was able to really just show that he might be, he's got one of the best handles I think in the league already, as when he enters, and then scoring for him comes naturally. I think it's the getting other guys involved that's going to take a little time to get up to that level of his his playmaking.
So what I think is, I just went back and I was watching some of his clips from that, reminding myself. And what's interesting in that Orlando game is he received so much more defensive attention than he got in the other games, which a lot of the time, I mean, you know what that kind of looks like when you're the point guard and you receive more defensive attention, right? It's like a pick and roll. The big's going to be up there. It's going to be, it's going to be that trap. It's going to be the high wall. It's going to be, needing to kind of play off of that. And it was interesting. He received so much more of that, which when that big comes up or there's a second guy there, right? Now you're the point guard and like, all right, outside of me, it's 4-on-3 Wolves, right? And that stood out to me in the Kentucky stuff too. When he got two guys on to his one, he played well off of that. And it's the optimistic, comparison that I've made in this whole process with him that's, related to his position and size is Trae Young. And that's something like Trae is low key really good at, for being like 6 flat, is like, okay, I got the guy on me. I got the big coming up to like trap and they're waving their arms everywhere. But Trae can, he can find Capella on that roll there. He can find the popping big. He can drag that out there. And I think like from a technical basketball like thing that Rob has right now, it's that. And that's encouraging against, NBA sized players, that he was doing that in that last summer league game. Like he was at Kentucky at times. That showed up to me on the film because that's going to be his thing, right? If we talk about a couple years down the road from now, or if he's in a hot stretch of a game, even this year, they're going to put that extra defensive attention on him, right? Because they're like, all right, this is the bucket getter out here. He's out here with 3 other dudes who aren't really offensive guys. Attention to Rob. Well, if he can play out of that, that's big, because I think we all feel pretty confident, or that it's likely that he's going to be a good one-on-one scorer in time when that comes. So, when we were doing pods in Vegas, I was pretty like, ugh, watching those first couple games, which is all overreaction. We're literally going off of a 5-game sample size. But I just wanted to reiterate that, maybe if people didn't listen to the hour-long podcasts about summer league games and are just tapping back in now, that was kind of my experience with Rob. And I found myself kind of shift my tune pretty big, even just off of that 5th game, because I was like, okay, I'm seeing some of the stuff I like from Kentucky against NBA caliber and NBA caliber players, or at least NBA caliber size there.
Yeah, and I don't necessarily say I regret how much we leaned into the size. It was just kind of eye-opening because, like you said, we were doing real basketball pods until the end of May, so there wasn't a lot of draft prep. So when I stood next to him, I'm like, I am taller than you.
Yeah, right.
It was interesting, but then I think that softened too because, again, he looked a little, maybe, I don't want to say slower, but early on he didn't look as explosive as maybe I thought. But it did kind of, we learned he was either just worn out from the whole process, because that draft process and all the workouts you're doing and all the traveling and stuff, or maybe he just had a nagging injury, but he just kind of
what did I say? It was ankle or foot. It was something in his foot like that. Not what wasn't like an injury, but it was something that had been like nagging him in the summer a little bit prior. Not enough to keep him out of summer league, so clearly not that serious. But if you're looking for an excuse, that's the excuse we got when we were asking about it, right?
And in the size thing, I still stand by like my core competency of it's like the Jaden thing with his attitude. It's just when Rob Dillingham has a bad night, people are going to talk about his size. It still happens with Trae, and Trae had like an elite playoff run that one year where he beat the Knicks and he's made all-star teams. when it doesn't go right with Trey, or when you hear this summer that there's no Trey Young market, some of it's financial, but some of it's just like, he's a small guard, and how is he going to fit into a system, or as the league gets bigger again, right? Even though small ball is still a thing, it's like the league's getting bigger, and can Trey survive? That's going to be the Rob Dillingham thing, whether it's right or wrong. But I've cooled it was never a concern, but it's just I've cooled even any concern I had that he's going to be fine. I mean, shout out to, I think he's a new father this week, but our guy Jake Painting did a really good video on him where he kind of dove into every angle, and he had some like Nick Van Exel comps. And Nick Van Exel was just one of my kind of favorite players growing up, and he's going to be fine because as he showed in that fifth and final game of Summer League, again, it's just Summer League, but he can score. And if he didn't have size concerns, the Wolves would have never been able to draft him because he would have gone 1 or he would have gone 2. He's as good as they get in this draft class at putting the ball in the bucket, and this team needs a little bit of that, right? I know they just came off a Western Conference Finals trip, but I've always joked that this team doesn't have enough guys that can dribble. Or like get their own shot. I mean, how many times did you see, if you this is really thin, but if you think Ant and Luka, kind of the same massive guard, can do whatever they want. I mean, Rob's got a little bit of that Kyrie in him, right? As that sidekick to Luka, and the Wolves need more guys that can get a shot off in a late clock situation, or just get the ball moving in the right direction with 8 seconds left on the shot clock. I told you a couple months ago before they drafted Rob, who's the second guy you would think of that would get a shot with 7 seconds left? It was like Naz Reid. You're like, okay, they probably need to improve that. So, and then it also ties into, not necessarily you want to go down this path, but it was a creative way not only to get Rob Dillingham and add him to your core, a core that includes Jaden and Ant and Naz and a couple other guys, but to kind of circumvent what is
let's get to that. Let's get to that in a little bit. Let's keep talking about, let's do Shannon first before as we're moving Summer League, and then once we get to draft,
I got it.
We'll talk about that a little bit.
Terrence Shannon Jr. is fucking awesome.
It was kind of the inverse of Rob, right? Like game 1, Shannon was like, boom. You saw, right, the size, the straight line driving, the like, oh yeah, this guy's 24 and he looks like it. And to that end, I mean, I think we were saying on pods, like, if I can leave Summer League feeling like Terrence Shannon Jr. is a legitimate option for the Wolves rotation next season, that's a massive win.
Massive.
And I didn't, and I thought, when I was saying that, I'm like, I don't know, was that gonna be like a 15% chance or whatever? And that happened. And I thought that was the real encouraging part. Now, it was mostly the first game, right, that he really popped, and a lot of that stuff was like, a lot of transition things and that, like, I think some people have like nitpicked, like, what is it going to look like when he's not a primary option? What's the catch and shoot going to look like? That stuff. But physically, it looked like he had it, and mentally, maturity, all that stuff. Like, I can paint a picture that I don't think is like super naive. That he's a piece of this thing, even next season at the end of the rotation, and to be a rookie. In the rotation, right, on one of the best teams in the Western Conference, like that's a pretty big deal from the 27th pick. You got anything else on him? You want to sprinkle in a Minot thought or anything? Otherwise, we can move on from Summer League.
The only Terrence Shannon Jr. thing that wasn't even a concern, I just really don't remember it. Granted, it was two months ago now. Was he was 4th in college last season in free throw rate. He clearly just knows how to catch the ball. He's a little bit of a running back. Gets downhill and get to the rim, and he loves physicality. And again, if we'd have had exit interviews ourselves after Mavs Wolves, I'd have been like, this team could probably use more guys that can dribble and more toughness, especially with the departure of Kyle Anderson, who is kind of a low key tough guy. So with Terrence Shannon Jr., my only concern that I want to see in October and November that I didn't see as much in July was catch and shoot, because he does catch the ball and have that kind of desire to just immediately start dribbling and going downhill because he's so good at it. When you replace, Jesse Adams with Rudy Gobert, or was it Jesse Adams? Is he an actor?
Jesse Edwards. Yeah.
Jesse Edwards. Okay, Jesse Edwards. When you replace, a big like that with Rudy Gobert or Karl Anthony Towns, there's just going to be less room in the paint for him to get to the rim. And I think this team does need, and maybe that's where Joe Ingles will still be able to kind of surpass him in the rotation early on, is because I don't think Ingles is going to be scared to let it fly on a catch and shoot. But everything else, like you said, Rob Dillingham aside, if they would have just drafted in the late 20s and got a Terrence Shannon Jr., it would have been a win. To put those two together, right? Like a really young, I'm sure Finch is going to use the term stacking skills with Rob Dillingham. He's more of a foundational, let's bring him along. Where can we plug him in? Terrence Shannon Jr. is ready to go. And that's because he's 5 years older. But this team needed, and maybe this is how we segue. I don't really have any Minot or Miller talks other than.
Yeah, well, that's okay. We can let that go.
We probably did enough of that
here.
in 2024. But it allowed them to add real good talent that also you could kind of fit into what is a core, a foundation, building blocks of a franchise, and to do it really cheap and to do it really creatively. That is going to be a mantra for all 30 teams moving forward. As this new CBA, we learn more about it, is how do we continue to upgrade our roster despite more and more teams having limited assets and limited ways to do so?
Yeah, I think that brings us, you mentioned Ingles. Let's just hit on that a little bit and remind everybody what happened in the free agency period.
Remind me what happened.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Well, I mean, as we kind of knew with the Wolves, like, as they said, they wanted to see if they could bring Kyle Anderson or Monte Morris back. And they didn't. Kyle Anderson ultimately signed, I think it was like 3 years for $27 million in Golden State. Monte Morris went to Phoenix, presumably like thinking he had the starting point guard job. Obviously, Tyus Jones came in later. Jordan McLaughlin went to the Sacramento Kings, and the Wolves replaced those three with Rob Dillingham, Terrence Shannon Jr., and Joe Ingles. And again, for people who weren't listening to pods over the summer, what we focused in on that was like it's a bet on getting faster, more athletic, more offensively inclined, and sacrificing a little bit of defense. And if you think about what the Timberwolves were last season, they were too slow, not good enough at offense, and exceptional at defense. So it was like a very logical, like, take a little from here and sprinkle it in over here situation. I mean, in ways, and we'll talk about this, I'm sure, endlessly, in the season, of what the differences are of, Kyle Anderson and Monte Morris versus, like Rob Dillingham and Joe Ingles, and how that impacts it. But in general, they got a little bit more athletic, they got a little bit more shooting, and lost some defense there. And that was the main offseason change, if we just remind everybody that they lost Kyle Anderson, Monte Morris, and J-Mac.
Well, and the Joe Ingles thing is actually important to bring back up because we did a really long rant on how Rudy Gobert's role with his international team kind of decreased, but I don't think that means you need to sell your stock on him as an NBA player. Joe Ingles was flat DNPing for Australia. An Australia team that was less talented than Team France. And I don't think that has much to do or say about Joe Ingles' game. Maybe just, again, a preference of what they were trying to do with their program.
It's just like what Joe Ingles is now, is like a catch and shoot shooter who can play make a little bit, but pretty much like at 37, like his thing is, he's that spacer. And they had the guy who signed with the Rockets basically just took that role from Ingles, and then Ingles was out. I mean, what we're expecting out of Ingles is to be a catch and shoot guy. And for the Wolves in the 9th man spot, can you shoot 46% from the corner on 100 attempts this year? That's what that's what he was signed to the minimum for, was to do that.
I think, and it'll probably become a bigger theme, right? As we start to get these pods going more and we kind of get into preseason and the first part of the regular season, is that the best way in my mind, and tell me if you disagree, to sum up what the Wolves offseason was like, is that Kyle Anderson could play make a little bit and played really good defense, and Joe Ingles can play make a little bit and can shoot the hell out of the ball.
Yep.
Right? And that's just pretty much the pivot. They went from kind of a Kyle Anderson formula to a Joe Ingles formula. They still have the defensive player of the year. They still have all this offensive weaponry with Ant and Carl and now Rob and all these other guys. But I think that, you made a comment about Terrence Shannon Jr. in that first game in Summer League, just getting a lot of easy buckets in transition, and people might scoff at his final box score. That's actually what this team needs, is more easy buckets in transition.
Totally.
So I know Tim Connolly's made mention multiple times in exit interviews or in the summer workouts and stuff that he wants his roster, he wants Finchie to play a little faster, to get some more of those easy buckets. So we always talk about, right, the top 10 in defense, the top 10 in offense thing. I think with the roster this team has now and just the understanding of defensive principles and Rudy's role,
the identity's like set there. Yeah.
But it's okay that, you're not going to be the first or the top team in defense next year. Like, I think if you could come down from first to fifth or sixth or seventh, but upgrade from offense from what is average, 15th, 16th to ninth or 10th, that would be massive. So I think it was the right bet. I think they did it in the right way by not just also going out and getting older. I mean, obviously Ingles, but they did it in a cheap way that also still allows them to build that, not a today pod, but down the road if they just want to lean super into offense. I mean, you got two guys in the draft that are really offensive minded. So way more of an exciting offseason than I think we probably thought on May 31st when we closed up shop for the season. And it's going to be really interesting in the preseason with those 5 games and then the early start of the regular season, because in some people's eyes, right, Dane, they didn't lose a lot. Like Jordan McLaughlin didn't always play. Monty Morris didn't always play. Kyle Anderson had a role. But, do they just, when Mike Conley subs out in that first game against the Lakers, is it Rob Dillingham that subs in for him? That'll be something interesting to watch.
Yeah, and I was, you're not blown away watching Monte Morris or Jordan McLaughlin play basketball. They're steady, and the Wolves the Wolves outscored opponents by more when those guys were on the floor than when they were off. The Wolves won more with Morris and McLaughlin on the floor than, and that's not typical. They served a value there, and I think we all know what Kyle Anderson's value was, and we know the ways that Kyle Anderson, hurt the team at times too from his lack of shooting. So yeah, I'm totally with you. It'll be interesting to see that stuff at the beginning of the season. It's funny. I was thinking about like when you're doing the Anderson and Ingles comparison and kind of equating them, and I pretty much agree. It's like, well, one of them signed for the minimum, one of them signed like a multi-year deal for like $9 million, like $9 million per year. Like the Wolves were in a position. This is a good way of reminding us that the Wolves were in a position coming into the summer where they were in a brutal financial situation where their only way to add to the roster due to the second apron restrictions was to add minimum contract players like Joe Ingles. And that brings us to draft night, which was the single event of the summer that surprised us the most, which was trading for Rob Dillingham. And what we didn't see at the time, because again, this is our first summer with the second apron, we were like, now after the fact, it's like kind of obvious. The workaround of the second apron, if you want to add talent to your team, is the only way you can add talent to your team that is more than a minimum contract player is by drafting players. So the Wolves were like, all right, we'll trade whatever we got to go get talent in this draft because we think the 8th overall pick, Rob Dillingham, is going to be more impactful this season than, you think about minimum contract, like Austin Rivers, they signed at point guard for like the minimum a couple years ago. Like that's what it is. And I think like, I'm almost like mad at myself as like a cap geek for not like predicting that in advance, because it literally was the one path, to add more talent to this team outside of minimum contracts. And they did that by trading their 2031 first, right, and a pick swap in 2030. I don't know if I ever played this clip, but I wanted to play it here. I thought it was interesting. We talked to Matt Lloyd, the Wolves assistant GM, on draft night about that move, and I think he kind of lays it out well with what they did, given their limitations to get Rob Dillingham.
Rob Dillingham was someone we really wanted to go get, and so Tim, he just went and got him. It was savage. It was just an incredible 2-day performance, and it really has put us in a position to get better.
How have you felt? We asked Tim this last night, but you're talking about having sort of limited resources to work with. This is a different sort of financial setup than you have worked in or Tim has worked in with the new rules. How did that kind of play into being more aggressive in the draft specifically?
Yeah, I would opine that Tim kind of laid the foundation for teams that are in our position going forward with the aprons and the tax exposure and the cap exposure. We had to address needs on the roster with limited resources, so we just utilized the draft as opposed to utilizing free agency or trades. So when Rob and Terrence get here and they get cycled up and they're introduced into the system, we'll have the opportunity to really get high production from them, where they're going to have great mentorship. The veterans on the team are all in a position of their careers where it's time to win and they expect to win. And so exposing those guys to that, sometimes these guys in the draft, it's about the situation you're entered into initially. That dictates the rest of your career. And I think with Rob and Terrence in particular, they fit such specific needs for us. There's going to be the capacity to really grow them organically. So we, Tim in again, the beautiful mind meme may have discovered a way for a team in a position like ours to enhance the roster, and it's via the draft.
I love that answer. And it lays out, right, Kyle, like where the Wolves were at, what they had to work with, and what they maximized with it. It's also like, I'm a big, just like as an NBA fan, like I love the ripple effects of like the why of how this player wound up on this team. And it's because they didn't have cap space, or they, in 2 years from now, they let this guy, whatever, all those sort of things. And, if Rob Dillingham hits, right, and like Rob Dillingham is like Tyrese Maxey, right, like something like that.
Again, the Kyrie to Luka.
It's just like the salary cap nerd in me loves that. I don't think he would have ever been on the Timberwolves if the Wolves didn't happen to be in this specific, unique, for the first time ever financial situation. And it's I don't know. If you're into that stuff, I think it's nerdy, but it's cool. It's what, created Rob Dillingham being a Minnesota Timberwolf.
I think that whole maneuver and that process of, as Matt Lloyd said, just Tim being a savage and just going up and getting him, also has started to been picked up a little more nationally as NBA pods and articles are starting to come out again. More and more people are like, that was a really creative way of addressing, like, we have no money, but we're still going to go get a real core piece.
Yeah.
And I know this isn't on the agenda for today, nor do I think we're ever going to really talk about it until we have updates. But to me, when I listen to Matt Lloyd speak, or I listen to Matt Lloyd kind of not even fanboy, just talk about how cool Tim Connelly is at his job, it just reminds me of, this ownership thing. At some point when it gets resolved, like we've talked a lot about the roster for this past hour, and I'm sure when you get Britt on later, we'll talk about the coaching staff, and they've made some upgrades and improvements, just a really good coach staff. They have an elite front office. And that's, Tim Connelly was literally identifying moves before a lot of other teams in the league kind of did. And that's how they figured out this way to kind of carve out space to get Rob. So it was an awesome move to upgrade the roster. It was an awesome, a lot of times in life you want to be a first mover. And just for them to be able to go out and address a need too, right? Like, what were we talking about? A movement shooter, a bucket getter, all this stuff. Like, they kind of fixed all of those things, at least we think for now. So they're loaded. Even the Joe Ingles thing, right? Like, you made me think about when you don't get a running back in the first couple rounds. Like, yes, Kyle Anderson and Joe Ingles have some similarities, but Kyle just went in the first couple rounds, and they just decided to wait till round 9 to go get their backup playmaker wing, has one skill set, and they did it for cheap. So other than
Chuba Hubbard.
Yeah, he is the Chuba Hubbard of the Wolves. Other than the Tyus Jones minimum, which is like a cheat code, it's hard to find a player that can fit in better with the team they signed for. I mean, the Austin Rivers one, no offense to him, but that's a really good comp because probably had one skill, and it really didn't translate in the end to what the Wolves needed, whereas Ingles, his offense and his shooting will. So the roster, we've said this now for at least 2 summers, but I keep thinking it's the deepest team they've ever had, and it's going to be on the coaching staff to see how that all pieces together, because I can list 11 guys I think will play, Dane, in LA on October 22nd or whatever. They're not all going to play.
Right.
So it'll be interesting.
Just because you did mention Conley and ownership, I don't know where this happened in the progression of the summer, but Michael Bloomberg joined Alex Rodriguez and Mark Lowry's ownership group to bolster, that group, financing of that group. We also found out this summer that the arbitration hearing is going to happen the first week of November. So he'll be like, I don't know, 5 games into the season or something like that, and that'll start coming up again. But that, in all seriousness, it is relevant. If Kyle is right in saying that the Timberwolves have one of the best front offices in the league, this is as annoying as the arbitration, this whole ownership situation is, it's very relevant to Tim Connolly, who had an opt-out in his contract after last season and opted to push that opt-out back 1 year. So he now has an opt-out after next season, after this, ownership situation has resolved itself. Oh yeah. Then just the other thing on draft night, this is the last thing I have, is despite trading up to get Rob Dillingham and doing that move for all the reasons they did that move, when I was just putting this together, I'm like, it is kind of interesting that they kept 27, right? And they took Terrence Shannon Jr. Because, you could, like you said, Terrence Shannon Jr., even if he has a good summer league, has a good camp, could still be on the outside of the rotation looking in day one. And they did choose to keep him rather than, you probably could have traded that first for future draft capital that you'd maybe then could have used in a trade at the deadline or in the draft next year. But to me, that signals like a real belief that they have in Terrence Shannon Jr. And I think it's also like, relevant to the cap, right? Again, if not Terrence Shannon Jr., then minimum contract. And Terrence Shannon Jr. is making like $500K more than a minimum contract. So it just wasn't like it had much of a cap burden. You have him. He's a first round pick, so 4 years under contract. I guess I get why they kept Shannon and went with that path, but it would have made sense to me at that time for them like, all right, we traded up for 8 and then later moved 27 for maybe a future first or something down the line there. But they did draft Shannon. We talked about what he looked like at Summer League, but just from like an asset management standpoint, I thought that was an interesting piece of draft night too.
Well, and isn't the 4 years of player control probably the biggest one to highlight there? Because, like,
and on the cheap, like he could be 26 and making like $4 million.
Right. But when you said that and he makes $500K or whatever over like a minimum, I was thinking of like Gary Trent. Like I like that signing for the Bucks, but he's a minimum contract is 1 year at the minimum. So he's going to go back into free agency next summer. Whereas the Wolves, again, I don't really want to talk about the ownership thing. I just want to wake up in November and know who owns the team. But they are positioning themselves, even though that is kind of the biggest domino in my mind long term, with all these different ways to pivot. But the easiest way to pivot, right, in any sort of roster building in pro sports is to have cheap talent that you have for a long period of time. I mean, even like, there's been no real payoff yet in the Leonard Miller, Josh Minott, Jalen Clark investments, but they're cheap and they don't really cost anything. So if they don't get on the court yet, they're not bringing you down. They're not sandbagging you. So it was a really, really impressive summer and off season that sets themselves up for, again, my biggest thing will be how does this team manage expectations? How do they manage more nationally televised games? How do they handle all that stuff? Because they've had their best years in my memory when the chips have kind of been down, and the chips have never been more up or all in or whatever. So it does set them up to be listen to NBA pods this summer. I don't know how many you've listened to, but a lot of like only 6 teams can win a title next year. And the Wolves are like in that 6 or that 7. And that's like always like a am I on drugs moment, because that's not how basketball pods have been my life. So it's going to be really interesting. And it does. We're doing this in early September, but media days at the end of the month. And then soon after that, it kicks off with 4 or 5 preseason games. And
yeah, dude, it's October 4th. They play that game in Palm Springs against the Lakers. That's a month from today.
And, are they going to run their late game execution stuff in that game? Probably not. But you're going to get if you miss the summer league, like you're going to get a real look at some of these guys like Rob, and we'll see what Jaden looks like. To me, he's future pod, but he's the big guy that I want to see. Ant gets a pay raise. Jaden gets a pay raise. With Jaden, I think the expectations are going to be, can you start to score more? Can you give this team another option in addition to all the other options they have. So it's been a fun summer. I didn't see it coming like this. I didn't see it, like you said, happening in a way where all of a sudden the team with no assets, right? They traded every single pick for Rudy Gobert. They have no money. All of a sudden is drafting 8th in the lottery.
Yeah, right.
That was wild, but really fun summer, and it's going to be here before we know it. So if you need some more time off from the Wolves, you got it. But if you can't wait for them to take the court again, it's coming
right
in a couple of weeks, and it's going to be awesome.
Yeah, and we're gonna start talking about it. Things will get. I know we're releasing this pod on the day the NFL season starts. Maybe not the smartest move there, but I know football is in a lot of people's forefront of their mind here, and maybe you're even listening to this episode right now, like 3-4 weeks from now, just kind of catching up on everything. But we're gonna keep. What I was gonna say is, I think kind of come mid-September, there's a little bit more. Just more stuff happens, more things to talk about, or we'll just get inspired to talk about more things. But look for the pod to be back here in September, not at its normal 4 or 5 episodes a week cadence. It'll probably be 1 this week, 1 next week, maybe 2 the final 2 weeks of September. But yeah, we're gonna keep rolling. And the one thing I did have in my notes before I let you go, Kyle, is we did want to throw out that what we're doing in this month right now is preparing ourselves from a content standpoint, but also from a business standpoint for the upcoming season. And part of that is getting sponsors for the show. And obviously, like a sponsorship is at the end of the day for us, it is a financial gain, right? It's what helps fund Kyle and me and traveling and those sort of things. But it has been a cool way, as we were just like referencing at the top with Falling Knife, to develop relationships with people in this community, and hopefully take some people from our community of people who listen to this show and come and patronize your business, or buy your clothing apparel line, or whatever it might be. So if you are interested in sponsoring the show, being an advertiser this season, starting in October, November, December, do reach out to DaneMooreProductions at gmail.com. That's also in the show notes. And me or Kyle will respond to you there, and we can talk about what that might look like. Again, DaneMooreProductions at gmail.com. You got anything else, Kyle?
No, just the continued message of support those that support us.
Yeah.
I think this will be, I said earlier that the Wolves tip off against the Lakers regular season in LA. You and I are going to be at that game, and it's all paid for by the fact that people sponsor the show and people support those sponsors. So, and also we just, I drink coffee, I drink wine, I eat Italian, I have a house, I need a realtor, like all those things that we're passionate about. I know how much it actually means to us. So we want to, if we want to help you, grow your company and all that stuff, because it means a lot to us to be able to do a job that is, we're not teachers, we're not firefighters. This is awesome and so much fun. But I know that we needed a break after we did 31 pods in May. But soon after that, kind of like that Saturday analogy, you and I were already cooking up. We want to do more. We want to have more pods this season. We want to be on the road more, have more interviews. So, yeah, if you're interested, now's the time, because Dane and I are looking for a couple more sponsors, and we want to make sure that it's as valuable, if not more valuable, for you, the business owner, than it is for us. So, and then again, just shout out to everyone that I know you had a bunch of messages in August calling you European for taking the month off, but this show still has the following it does, and I will always promote the YouTube thing if we can get the subscribers up, because we want to do cool stuff on there. But just thanks everyone that was like, hey, I missed the show. And a lot of people missed you. So this was a 70-minute version of that 30 seconds last time on the Dane Moore NBA podcast. But I feel back. I feel ready. I think it's going to be time to start breaking down some positions, and I'm sure you and Britt will have 1,000 topics to talk about later this month. But the Wolves are back again, even though it's September.
They are. Appreciate you doing it, Kyle. You guys already probably follow Kyle on Twitter. You can listen to him and Phil Mackey over on Flagrant Howls. They did a couple of August episodes as well, if you do have that basketball itch in September. We'll try to satiate that some here, but also we love what Kyle and Phil are doing over there as well. So yeah, gonna figure out something for next week with a different guest. But until then, he's Kyle. I'm Dane. Peace out.
How I'm feeling, man, I hope it never stop, yeah. Green and hot, so you can find me in the